I want to talk tonight a little bit about a topic that's a topic that I think we've all thought about a little bit, but at least speaking for myself, never thought about too much, and that is the presence of Moshe in the Haggadah, or of course the lack of presence of Moshe in the Haggadah. And the thing that started me thinking about it is this quote from Rav Soloveitchik, who wrote or said, "I remember that when I was a small child, I asked why Moshe is not mentioned in the Haggadah. And all the answers my father gave me, which were similar to the explanations I've given here, were futile. Simply, I cried. Finally, my father, in order to placate me, found the name of Moshe in the Haggadah. It is not in the Haggadah proper, but in a proof text. They believed in the Lord and in his servant Moshe. Vayaminu b'Hashem uv Moshe avdo. This calmed my mind somewhat, but I still felt that we were committing an injustice against Moshe. And the thing that really amplifies the omission of Moshe is, if you notice in the Haggadah, when we get into the heart of the Maggid in the Arami Ovid Avi, and we quote the pasuk "Vayotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim," the Haggadah quotes the Midrash, "Lo al yidei malach, v'lo al yidei saraf, v'lo al yidei shaliach." That Hashem came to bring us out of Mitzrayim, not with an angel, and not with a shaliach, not with an agent. Ela kadosh baruch hu b'chvodo u'v'atzmo, but Hashem Himself, in His own honor, came. Shenamar v'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim, v'kesi kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, u'bechol Elohei Mitzrayim e'eseh shvatim. I Hashem, Ani Hashem, did everything. And by saying lo al yidei shaliach, it's almost as if Moshe, it's almost as if Hashem is saying, Ani v'lo Moshe, because Moshe was the shaliach. He was called the shaliach, the messenger or the agent of Hashem. Hashem told him in the very beginning, Ata lecha ve'eshlachacha el paro. I will send you as my shaliach. Hotzei means, and you will take out es ami b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. And Moshe says, I don't want to be the shaliach. Shlach na b'yad tishlach. And ultimately he agrees and he goes as the shaliach of Hashem. So when the Haggadah says, Ani v'lo shaliach, it's basically saying, Moshe, he didn't really do anything. It was just Hashem. And we don't only omit his name, but Hashem almost steals the thunder that was Moshe Rabbeinu. Similarly, we say Hashem says, opens the Aseret HaDibros, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeis avadim. It's Hashem Himself who did it. And I think that the tension starts to develop. If you look in this Rambam, in source 5, the Rambam tells us, mitzvah lahodia labanim afilu lo shalo, that it's a mitzvah to tell the story to the children. They're supposed to ask the question. If they don't ask the question, we still have to tell the children the story. Shenamar v'gadato levincha lefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo. According to the intelligence of the child, the parent should teach the child. Ketzad im haya kaktan otipesh. Omer, so first of all, this whole Ketzad seems superfluous. The Rambam says that you tell the child in his age-appropriate, ability-appropriate of the child, the details to the extent that the child will understand it. He could have left it just there, but he decides to give examples of how one might design the story for different level children. So the Rambam tells us, Im haya katanu tipesh omer lo b'ni, kulanu hayinu avadim. My child, we were slaves. Kamo shivchazu o kamo eved zeh, like such and such slave. We were all like that, slaves in Mitzrayim. B'layla hazeh pada'u tanu kadosh baruch hu vayotzienu l'cherut. And on this night, Hashem redeemed us and took us to freedom. V'im haya habein gadol v'chacham, if the child is older or wiser, modio masha ira lanu b'Mitzrayim. Then we tell him what happened in Mitzrayim in greater detail. V'nisim shenasu lanu al yidei Moshe Rabbeinu, and the miracles that occurred through Moshe Rabbeinu. Hakol lefi da'ato shel ben. It all depends on the ability of the child. And the Rambam conspicuously gives us examples of what we might add for older, more advanced children. And the thing he specifically mentions is the miracles that Moshe brought. So the Rambam brings in Moshe, but doesn't bring in Moshe. He brings in Moshe, but says only for the advanced level. And the question that this raises is sort of twofold. Firstly, why is Moshe's role the one thing that the Rambam chooses to suggest that we add to the advanced child? And secondly, if this is a requirement for the advanced child, why don't we actually do it? Why don't we talk about Moshe? Or do we? And in order to get a fuller appreciation of the role of Moshe in the Seder and in the Mitzrayim story, I'd like to give some context into the idea of agency and shlichus in halacha in general. The Gemara tells us that agency, shlichus, is a very known principle in Jewish law. And the Gemara in Kedushin tells what's the source for the idea of agency? Shlichus minalan. How do we know that there's such a thing as shlichus? And the Gemara presents three sources in the Torah and combines them to become a paradigm. The first is the case of divorce. Shlichus minalan detanya. V'shalach melamed shehu osa shliach. The word v'shalach, which is used in the Torah in respect to divorce, alludes to the idea that he can make a shliach. Actually, the husband and or the wife could make a shliach in order to do the divorce ceremony. In other words, in order to, the man could deliver the get document to his wife with an agent. The woman could make an agent to receive the divorce document, which actually occurs sometimes in practice. This teaches us the principle of agency, of power of attorney, that you can make someone else your agent to create a halachic effect. Secondly, we have shlichus in the mitzvah of the separation of truma, that if a person has a mitzvah to separate truma, that we can't eat any of our produce that grows in Israel until we separate the truma for the purpose of giving it to the Kohen. And not only could a person who owns the produce separate truma, but the word atem, gam atem comes atem gam atem l'rabot hashaliach. An agent could be assigned the task of separating the truma, and it will take effect and fulfill the mitzvah of hafrashas truma and can make the food edible for consumption. That's a second form of agency. And the third, which is very important for the laws of shlichus, and also brings us back to Pesach, is an agent to shecht a korban Pesach. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, minayin sheshlucho shel adam kimoso, shenemar v'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael bein harbayim. V'chikol akal kulan shochtin. Does every individual Jew who has the obligation of korban Pesach really shecht his own korban? V'halo eino shochet ela echad. Only one person does the shchitas HaPesach for each family or each group of people that brings their korban. Ela mikan sheshlucho shel adam kimoso. So here we have a third example of agency, and in this case, the agent is not only affecting a legal halachic status of divorce or the status of truma, but the shliach is actually fulfilling a mitzvah on behalf of the person who sends him. And another source the Gemara presents is also from Korban Pesach, mehacha v'yichu lahem ish selaves avos selabayis. That there's one animal brought for each family or multiple families who are sharing one korban. So here we have the idea that an agent can fulfill a mitzvah on behalf of somebody else. Now, you might wonder, how far could this go? How many mitzvahs can I do? This sounds pretty good. Maybe I can make an agent to go to shul for me, to daven for me, to wear tefillin for me, to hear shofar for me, Rosh Hashanah. Maybe I can really make life a lot easier. Make an agent to eat the chametz for me. So the Ksos HaChoshen, who is one of the Mefarshim, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, quotes a Tosfos Rid, who poses this question. Yesh makshim, some ask, Im kein l'chol davar mitzvah yolil hashaliach. So for every mitzvah, we should extend the principle of shlichus, of agency. V'yomer adam l'chavero shev b'sukkah ba'avuri hanach tefillin avuri. So a person could tell his friends, sit in the sukkah for me. I'm going to sleep. Wear tefillin for me. V'lav milsahi. And this is not a possibility. If the mitzvah was commanded to do with your body, how could you assign an agent to do it if the mitzvah is to be done with your body? And this phrase, I think, is the most useful phrase, a mitzvah shebegufo. If the mitzvah is obligatory for your body, you can't have an agent do it on your behalf. You're doing nothing. Certainly, a shliach would work for divorce or even for marriage, though I don't recommend having a shliach go and perform the marriage ceremony with your spouse. But it's effective. Because the effect, the status change is effective for the person who is the mishaleach, the person who sent the agents. Shokesev beget on a ploni. The get document has the name of the husband and the wife. And the shliach is just doing this like technical requirement of delivering it or accepting it. Or the husband, we say, Hare, the shliach would say, let's say the husband appoints a shliach, and he would say, Hare at mikudeshet leploni, to the person who sent me. So the effect relates to the person who sent the shliach, and the mitzvah or the status is fulfilled for him. And the same thing with truma. I make a shliach separate truma for me, and it's my produce that he's designating as truma. With the korban pesach, if I ask someone else to slaughter my korban pesach, it's shechted in my name, and then I eat it. Aval b'sukkah, how could you do this with sukkah? Hachinami yachol lomar l'shlucho aseli sukkah. I can tell my agent, build a sukkah for me, for who yosheva, and I will sit in the sukkah. I hire someone to build it for me, and then I eat in the sukkah. Aval im yeshev ba chaveiro, but if your friend sits in the sukkah, lo kiyem hu kulum v'chein tzitzis v'chol mitzvos. And many of the mitzvos, when the mitzvah is to do yourself with your own body, to eat in the sukkah, to wear the tzitzis, to shake the lulav, you can't ask someone else to do that for you. And similarly, just another example would be Matanos Lev Yonim on Purim, where often, I'll recommend, give money to an organization who will deliver it on your behalf on Purim as your agents. But they're delivering your money on your behalf on Purim. But if you tell the organization, give your own money to the poor, that doesn't help you do the mitzvah. A very interesting application comes in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. And the Ramah is discussing a very interesting halacha, which is that, and this is in Choshen Mishpat, which is generally the laws of like monetary law, suing someone else for damages, or etc. The Ramah says, let's say someone steals someone else's mitzvah. I have a mitzvah to do, and I have an opportunity for a mitzvah, and you steal my opportunity, you jump in and you do it instead of me. So the Ramah says they imposed a fine of 10 zehuvim, 10 gold coins, to be paid for a mitzvah. Not that we can actually give a price to the mitzvah is priceless, but we have to do something. So 10 zehuvim, no matter what the mitzvah is. If you take my mitzvah, you owe me 10 zehuvim. Now, here's an example. Hayalo ben Lumbel. You have a son, a brand new baby son, who needs a bris milah. And you're about to do the bris milah, and ba acher v'malo. Someone else comes up to the front of the shul, pulls out his knife, and does the bris milah. Chayav litin lo yud zehuvim. So the mitzvah thief owes 10 zehuvim to the father who is about to do the bris milah. Aval, however, nasno la'achar limo. Let's say you give the job of the bris to somebody else. Uba acher v'malo. So you hire one moel, but there's another moel in shul. I don't know. He's upset he wasn't asked to do the bris milah. He jumps up, gets a chance, and does the bris milah. Potzer, he does not have to pay. The reason is that the parent has mitzvah number one. They are the first priority of the mitzvah of bris milah. If you steal from the parents, then you owe the parents the 10 zehuvim for stealing the mitzvah. The secondary mitzvah is that if the parent can't do it, so the whole Jewish community has a mitzvah to do the bris milah. Now the parents hired a moel. The moel got priority, but he doesn't really have more of a mitzvah than any other Jew. And therefore, if a second Jew steals from the first Jew, then he didn't really steal a mitzvah because they both have the equal priority in the mitzvah of bris milah. The Shach, in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch on this halacha, says, by the way, speaking of this, I've seen many people who they choose to ask others to do the mitzvah of bris milah as a kavod. The father, let's say, knows how to do a bris, but he decided that I want to honor someone else to the mitzvah of bris milah. So here the father's giving up his mitzvah, but he's willing to do it. They still give it to somebody else. If the moel stole it, he'd have to pay you money. Why would you give it up? Mitzvah gedola shamila. Yesh lebezdin levatel hadavar hazeh. The beis din, the community, should discourage this kind of behavior. So the Shach says, since the primary mitzvah is the parent, don't give it to somebody else, because then you're not getting the mitzvah. If you don't know how to do the bris milah, definitely hire a shaliach. But in general, the principle of shlichus when it comes to mitzvos is that we can employ shlichus. We could hire or appoint an agent to do a mitzvah for us, but it depends on the mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah shebegufo that you have to do yourself, no one else can stand in your place. If it's just a mitzvah to create an effect, become married, have the truma separated, then someone else can do the action on our behalf. In the case of sins, we have a principle which says the opposite. Ein shliach l'dvar avera. There's no agency. If I hire someone to steal from me, to commit arson for me, to eat not kosher for me, then the agent gets the sin, but my agency, he's not my messenger, he's not acting on my behalf. There's no agency, there's no power of attorney to affect a sin. Diamrinan, and the reason is, the Gemara says, Divrei Harav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishomin. If you have a choice to listen to the master or his student, who would you listen to? If I tell you, let's say your rabbi tells you, go eat not kosher, but you know that God said you shouldn't eat not kosher. So why would you listen to me? If you chose to, it's your own choice, but you have no agency. And therefore, ein shliach udvar avera, with the exception of the opinion of Shammai, who disagrees. Ha'omer l'shlucho, the majority opinion is if you tell your agent, say harogat nefesh, go, you hire a hitman, kill someone on my behalf, hu chayav, the murderer is chayav, the sholchav, and the one who sent him is patur. Shammai hazaken omer, mishum chagai hanavi. Shammai hazaken says in the name of the Navi, sholchav chayav. The boss is culpable for murder. The person who sent the shliach is chayav for murder, and we don't say, not just that you're accessory, not that you encourage it, you're actually the murderer. And the agent is just your arm. He didn't do anything, or he didn't do a good thing, but he did not commit the crime of murder. Shenamar, because the source for Shammai Hazaken, Oto haragta becherev b'nei Ammon. You killed through the sword of Ammon. And this is talking about David, who wanted to marry Bathsheba and wanted to get her husband Uriah out of the way. So David tells Yoav, the general, to put Uriah in the line of fire in the war against Ammon. And Uriah dies, David marries Bathsheba, and everything works out. The Navi, of course, comes and tells David that he did a terrible thing. And he says that, now, who's the murderer? Who killed Uriah? There are three people who you might look at. You might look at the Bnei Ammon, who actually killed him. You might look at Yoav, who sent him to the front line. And you might look at David, who told Yoav to send him to the front line. And the Navi says to David, Oto haragta becherev b'nei Ammon. You, David, killed Yoav through the Bnei Ammon, who were at war, and they were just doing what they do in a war. And Shammai says, you see from here that there is agency, that Yoav was not considered to be the murderer. He was just acting on behalf of David, and it was David who was the murderer. So Shammai says there is agency for sin. The other Chachamim disagree with Shammai, and they say there's never agency, and they say that in this case, it's an exception to the rule, because since David HaMelech was the king, and Yoav had no choice but to listen, otherwise David probably would have killed Yoav. So therefore Yoav is just an arm of David HaMelech. But in all other cases, Yoav would have been the murderer. And Shammai says that no, Yoav should have known better, because Divrei Harav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishomim, he should have listened to Hashem and defied the king. And since he didn't, we see from here that any hitman, it's the boss who's chayav and not the hitman. Okay, so this was a broad survey on the laws of shlichus with mitzvos and averos. And I think that the common principle is that it sort of depends on what the issue is. That sometimes it's a mitzvah shebegufo, that the thing that we're talking about is very much action-based, and we have to look only at who did the action. And sometimes it's result-based, and therefore the agency could affect something on behalf of somebody else. And the agent is really just a pawn of somebody else. And when it comes to Moshe and his role in Mitzrayim, so you have this contradiction where on the one hand, Hashem is very emphatic in the beginning of Sefer Shemos that Moshe should be his shliach, and Moshe should act on his behalf in order to carry out the redemption from Mitzrayim. Then on the other hand, you have these sources in the Chumash where it's Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, and you wonder whether this was just an act of agency, that what God's accomplishment was that He ensured our redemption, and Moshe was just, I don't know, like his pawn, his shliach, his agent, but it was such an effective agency that it related to Hashem, and really Hashem did it. Or did Moshe actually have a role that's being sort of overlooked? Now, if we turn our attention to the very end of the Torah, the last 3 psukim of the Torah, the Torah gives this very fascinating description of Moshe Rabbeinu. Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. There was never a navi for the Jewish people like Moshe. Asher yida'o Hashem panim el panim, that knew God face to face. L'chol ha'osos v'amofsim asher shalacho Hashem la'asot b'eretz Mitzrayim. To all the miracles that God sent Moshe to do in Mitzrayim, l'paro, l'chol avadav, l'chol. So, and here we have this little bit of an ambiguity. Who did these miracles? L'chol ha'osos v'amofsim. Is this relating to the word Hashem, or is this referring to the greatness of the prophecy of Moshe, who did all of these miracles? And here we have the word again, shlacho, that God sent him, la'asot b'eretz Mitzrayim. Who actually did it in Mitzrayim? Who is the actor in Mitzrayim, la'asot? U'l'chol hayad ha'chazaka, and the strong hand, u'l'chol ha'marah ha'gadol, asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael, that Moshe did. Again, we have the word asa Moshe in the eyes of Bnei Israel. And before I unpack some of the, I think, important nuances in this psukim, these phrases jump out at us. The otot, the movtim, the yad ha'chazaka, the morah gadol. These words jump out because they're familiar to me from the Haggadah. They're in the psukim of the Aramei Ovid Avi that we read in the Haggadah. And just to look at that, Vayotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim biyad chazaka b'zro netuyah morah gadol be'otos umofsim. And in this pasuk, these same descriptions are used, the Yad Chazakah, the Morah Gadol, the Otot Umoftim, but in this case, they're being used to describe Hashem. Vayotzinu Hashem miMitzrayim. Here, in the last 3 psukim of the Torah, they seem to be describing Moshe. The Otot Umoftim asher shalacho Hashem la'asot ba'aretz, that Moshe did. The Yad Chazakah, the Morah Gadol asher asa Moshe, that Moshe did. So who had the Yad HaChazakah? Who had the Morah Gadol, the Otot, and the Moftim? So on one level, the resolution to this contradiction is that there's a different person speaking in both cases. In the very end of the Torah, this is after Moshe died, so presumably it's Hashem's description. Hashem is saying, Moshe, you were such a great person. You did all of the Yad HaChazakah, Morah Gadol, Otot Moftim. You know, like Moshe, you were amazing in Mitzrayim. You just were spectacular. And then Moshe says to Hashem, when he had the floor in Parshas Kitavo, and Moshe says, Hashem, no, it was you. It was all you. You, how did you do that? You had the Yad HaChazakah, the Morah Gadol, the Otot Moftim. They're each sort of attributing the awesomeness of the miracles to each other. So it could be they're both being humble and sort of focusing on and trying to highlight the achievements of each other. But I think there's another layer to understanding this. And the Ramban, in his comments on these psukim, quotes the Rambam, who says something really extraordinary. The Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim, Ki ha'aflaga leMoshe Rabbeinu, that which we're describing the greatness of Moshe, the uniqueness of the prophecy of Moshe. Masha amar leParo l'chol avadav l'chol artzo u'leinei kol Yisrael. That the Torah is trying to show how Moshe was the greatest Navi that there will ever be, and the way to describe it is by highlighting the fact that he did his miracles in front of everybody. Everyone saw it. The Jews, the Egyptians, the ones who supported Moshe, the ones who didn't support Moshe, his enemies, everyone saw it. It was unique that he was able to do miracles in that way. When it comes to the other Nevi'im, they did their miracles in front of individuals. Only a couple of people saw it. Like Elisha, the woman saw it. Her husband didn't even see it. Siprana li, as called Gedolos Asher saw Elisha. Tell me what Elisha did, because it wasn't visible to others. The Ramban happens to disagree. The Ramban says that I don't agree, because there are other Nevi'im who also did very public miracles, like Eliyahu Hanavi and Har Carmel, when everyone saw. When Yoshua stopped the sun, when Yoshua stopped the sun for the war to end, everyone saw it. I mean, you can't really hide the sun. So the Ramban says, no, that wasn't the uniqueness of Moshe, because other Nevi'im also acted in public. But the thing to focus in on this Rambam is that the Rambam implies that the miracles of Mitzrayim, the 10 plagues, the Kriyas Yamsuf, occurred as a reflection of the greatness of the prophetic status of Moshe Rabbeinu. Meaning that if Hashem would have chosen another Navi to be the leader to take us out of Mitzrayim, then the miracles would have been different. Because only Moshe can carry out miracles in this way. So actually, when you read this back into the conversations that Hashem had with Moshe in the beginning of Sefer Shemos, when Hashem was like, I want you to take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, and Moshe says, I don't want to be the one. And I think Moshe was saying, anyone can do it, or you don't need anybody. Do it yourself. What Hashem was sort of saying, according to the Rambam, is that if someone else comes, I won't be able to do the same miracles that I want to bring out. I want the miracles to be visible to everybody, and only you are a great enough Navi to make that happen. And according to the Rambam, this means that Moshe actually carried out the miracles. When it says, okay, he didn't do the miracle, but it was because of him that Hashem was able to do these miracles. When it says the Morah Gadol Asher Asa Moshe, Moshe actually made it that the miracles would happen. And it also makes you appreciate why the Rambam says that when you tell the story of Mitzrayim in the advanced level, you have to include the role of Moshe, because Moshe actually brought about the redemption in the way that it occurred. And Moshe wasn't just an agent who did something on behalf of somebody else, but he was not a player at all. It was just Hashem. Actually, Moshe and Hashem were partners in the redemption, according to the Rambam. But I like to also suggest an alternative view to this Rambam that actually resonates a bit more with me personally, which is based sort of a combination of a sentence by the Rav Soloveitchik and a sentence of the Ramban. And the Ramban, on the words Asa Moshe, back in these psukim, when the pasuk says Asher Asa Moshe, the Ramban comments and says, V'tam Asher Asa Moshe shehechin v'her'eh zeh le'enei kol ha'am, that Moshe prepared, like hachana, he prepared this and showed it to the eyes of the people. Meaning, the Ramban is saying that you don't need to interpret the word asa as if he made it, but rather he brought it to focus to the eyes of the people. And the Ramban gives 3 examples where the word asa in the Torah does not always mean made. Et hanefesh asher asu b'Charan. The Torah says that Avram and Sarah made the people of Haran. They didn't make the people. They help the people perceive Hashem. Clearly, the word asu does not mean made. They didn't make people. Vayimaher la'asot oto. This is Avraham when he has his guests. And he goes and he says, I'm going to get animals to serve to the guests. Vayimaher la'asot oto. Avraham did not make animals at that moment. He prepared animals for them. And we say in the Kiddush, to remember Shabbos, la'asos es yom HaShabbos, to make the day of Shabbos. We don't make Shabbos, we didn't create Shabbos, but we prepare Shabbos, or we prepare ourselves to experience Shabbos, to make it the day that it will be. Here too, Moshe lo asa hayad hachazaka v'hamara hagadol, rak hechin osam. He didn't make them, but he prepared them. Uba'avuro nasu le'inei kol Yisrael. Because of Moshe, they were to the eyes of the people, not because he changed the miracle, but he changed the perception of the Jewish people. And this is really captured also in this frame, this line of Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik says that from the time of his birth, he is recounted in every parsha in the Torah, except for Tetzaveh. He is so constantly the focus in the Torah, but he was not immortalized as a political hero or a strategist. Moshe was immortalized as a teacher. We do not say Moshe Goalenu or Moshe Moshienu. We say Moshe Rabbeinu. Calling him Moshe Goalenu, Moshe, our Redeemer, would be blasphemy. So this is very different from the Rambam, who says that he actually brought it about, with that approach. It's more with the Ramban that Moshe Heichin v'hereh le'inei kol Yisrael. Moshe made Hashem visible to the Jewish people. Moshe did not cause the miracles, but Moshe caused us to perceive the miracles. Moshe didn't cause Hashem to get involved in our destiny, but Moshe enabled us to appreciate what Hashem did for us. And even for the Egyptians, Moshe did not cause God to reveal himself to Egypt, but Moshe enabled the Egyptians to see the hand of God, as they say, this is Hashem. And in this context, I think as we can resolve the contradiction between this psukim, where Moshe says, "Vayotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim biyad chazaka b'zroa netuyah morah gadol otot moftim." Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, and on the flip side, the act of bringing us out of Mitzrayim is like a mitzvah shebegufo. It's something that you do with your body, and you can't say someone else did it on my behalf. And Moshe is not acting as God's shaliach to actually bring about the miracles. But Moshe heichin, shalacho Hashem la'asos, this word asa is really actually twice in both psukim, that Moshe made the miracles visible and perceivable, and he enabled the Jewish people to appreciate that which God did for us. And I think that Moshe actually really accomplished this not only in Mitzrayim, but every year at our Seder. Because every year at our Seder, we do not say Moshe's name once when we tell the story of Mitzrayim. I mean, we might bring it up, but it's not in the text even one time. However, the text that we use to describe the story is taken from Sefer Devarim, the Arami Ovid Avi, from Parshas Kitavo. And those words were the original words of Moshe Rabbeinu. Sefer Devarim is a speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. So basically, at the Seder, Moshe is showing us what Hashem did. Just like he did at Mitzrayim, he showed the Jewish people what God is doing. That's what Moshe does at every Seder when we read Moshe's words, and he is he is omitted, but he is ever present in every single word, because it is all the words of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's what his shlichus was. His shlichus was, he was sent with a mission, but he had a role. He was a partner with Hashem. He had a role that was different than God's. God did the whole redemption. And I think this was part of Moshe's confusion in the beginning of Sefer Shemos, when Moshe says, you do this. Why do you need me? This doesn't make any sense that you want me to act on your behalf. This is a mitzvah shebegufo. This is your mitzvah. You're the Redeemer. You promised Avram that you're going to enslave us. You did that yourself. You promised Avram that you were going to free us. Now do that. Go ahead and do it, Hashem. And Hashem did. But Hashem wanted Moshe to fulfill a different mission, because only a human could instruct and help other humans to perceive Hashem. And the word agent has two meanings in the English language. An agent, on the one hand, is someone who has a legal power of attorney to act on someone else's behalf. In that sense, an agent has no legal status. It's not him. It's everything he does is for somebody else. But the word agency, used in the context of sociology, has the exact opposite connotation. That agency is when you have the ability to make your own choices with your life. And I think that Moshe was both. He was an agent of Hashem. He was sent by Hashem. God says, I am going to send you. Moshe was doing a mission of God's, but he also had agency in that he had his own job to lead the people and help them see Hashem. And in that sense, he was independently acting for a certain goal. I think that in this sense, Moshe and his role in Mitzrayim is an exact model for what we're all supposed to do as well. The Torah tells us, verse 21, that when Hashem tells Moshe in Parsha Shemos what he's going to do, here's again, Anochi shlachticha, I've sent you, but then Hashem adds, B'hotziacha et ha'am miMitzrayim, ta'avdun et ha'elokim al ha'ar hazeh. When you bring the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, they're going to serve God on this mountain. And in some ways, this is the climax of the redemption. And in some ways, it's almost undermines the sense of freedom, that we're finally free from slavery, but don't worry, you're going to have another master who you're going to serve, and that is going to be Hashem. Similarly, in B'chukosai, it says, Zacharti lahem b'risva shonim asher hotzetzi otam me'eretz Mitzrayim le'nei hagoyim lios lahem le'elokim. Hashem says, I brought them out of Mitzrayim to be their God. And we also were taken from Mitzrayim for a purpose to serve Hashem. And you might say, so we're still slaves. Instead of being a slave to Paro, we're a slave to Hashem. Instead of being Paro's agents to do the jobs that he tells us to do, now we're the agents of Hashem to do what he tells us to do. And in some ways, so where have we really gotten? What has really changed? But I think that the main change is that the new agency, the new shlichus that we have for Hashem is an agency which is our choice. That we're always going to have Bechira Chavshis, which is something that we did not have in Mitzrayim. And I think that the thing to really reflect on is that if we're an agent, if we are committing ourselves to Hashem, it's important to appreciate the fact that all people work for something. No one works for themselves. If you work for yourselves, then you work for your customers and your clients. We all work, we all dedicate our lives towards something that we decide to be our goals. And we have agency. We have control over our lives when we're the ones who choose what we're going to commit our lives to. And the thing that we celebrate on Pesach is the fact that we want to choose and choose again to dedicate our lives to Hashem and His mission. And we all have a particular mission that we bring to the table, a particular shlichus that we are working on. And I want to just share one closing story of Rav Aryeh Levin, who was a tzaddik living in Yerushalayim in the 19th century. And what he's known for is, in the 1940s, he would go to the central prison of Jerusalem, which was in the Russian compound during the time of the British Mandate. And he would go and he would visit the Jewish prisoners. And by the way, there's a great museum there today. And the prisoners really appreciated the hope that he would give them. He once visited on Chol HaMoed Pesach, and he asked them about their Seder. Were they able to have a Seder in the prison? And one prisoner smiled and he said, everything was fine. We were able to fulfill the halachos. We had wine and matzah, but when we came to Shvoch Chamascha, and we usually open the door at that time, they wouldn't let us open the door. And it really ruined it. It took away so much from the Seder. And Rav Aryeh turned back and he said, you're making a mistake. You didn't miss out on that moment of freedom. You have the key to freedom, the key to your heart, which can give spiritual freedom. We are prisoners, he said, in our own bodies, but we can be freed of the bondage of our materialistic desires by opening our heart and allowing ourselves to gain control. Then we become truly free. That freedom is not a fact, it is a mindset. It is impacted by our circumstances, but is a mindset. And a person could be in a prison with no control, but in his mind have a sense of choice of what he values, and to have that spiritual ability to make choices for yourself, that's freedom. And that's the freedom we celebrate on Pesach, that we have the freedom to choose what we want to commit ourselves to. And we don't call it an enslavement of God, but we call it a shlichus. And each person has a personal shlichus that God sent us to this world to achieve. And like Moshe Rabbeinu, we're working for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we're also working to contribute in our own way. Each person was created differently to make our own contribution to the world and to the missions that God has for us. And it is that shlichus that we celebrate, that Moshe achieved, and we too try to achieve every Pesach. Have a Chag Sameach.